Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, May 12th, 2020. Time for another show. It is Tuesday, and that is usually Joan McCarter's day to come on and brief us on all of the things that are, well, probably all the things that are keeping her up at night. I haven't heard from her this morning. I usually don't. I mean, I usually just put out the word that it's Tuesday, and that's that. Although I might jump in ahead of things here. I'm a little concerned. Not about her health or anything like that. I'm a little concerned that she might not be able to join us today, only because today at 10, the 10 o'clock hour is usually when she joins us. 10 o'clock is the time designated for Dr. Fauci to start testifying before the Senate. And my guess is that they may want, I don't know whether they're going to assign that to her or to somebody else, but that may be something that Joan wants, needs, must keep an eye on. And it's an entirely possible thing. So we may find out later in the day that she just can't make it. We may find out that everything's fine and she'll join us. She may want to cover it live here on the show. I don't know. I'm not certain what the plans are. I'm making excuses early because I don't know. I got the idea that if we did that early, then people would excuse her absence and my overlooking the fact that she might actually have to be on hand to watch the testimony. Plenty going on early this morning. Also, today is the day for a big day in the Supreme Court. Two of the major cases involving the guy who says he's president, is the big dumb guy, Trump, who's in the White House and we can't get him out, right? And apparently some of the more important cases for opportunities for the Supreme Court either to put an end to this charade or, well, probably not that much, but or to paper over the whole thing and let us know that we were all just once again pre-wrong in our understanding of where the President of the United States stands with respect to the rule of law and whether or not he needs to submit to it or not. So we'll find all of those things out in short order. Many of the pieces of the puzzle will be revealed today. Daily Coast Radio now marking the day because we're live. Bill tells me, and that's how I know. So what are we going to do? What are we going to find out? Do you want to know what we'll be doing today? What we'll be talking about today? He's asking you that question, actually. Why don't you? What? Oh, okay. Here we are. It's a Trump thing. Why don't you ask China? Huh? I think you'll get a very unusual answer from China. Yes, of course, that's how he says China. It's not just me taking advantage of the fact that there's no FCC policing of podcasts as far as I'm aware, although, that could change. And I'm sure I'll be arrested and re-educated shortly if it is. You must have seen by now clips of the final exchanges in the president's Rose Garden press conference yesterday, in which, he had fights with two women reporters who just happened to be there representing some of the top media outlets in the country, the Washington Post and CNN. And of course, I can never remember exactly who's who and what their names are, and I'm just not smart that way, and I never remember those things. But I did see those exchanges, and let's see. I mean, I guess I should see whether they're just easily available. Maybe they're up on they probably were on the front page of the of Daily Coast yesterday, right after it happened. I don't think we probably waited very long to cover those that exchange. But of course, there was a moment in which the question was posed from our Washington Post reporter, who I guess is of Chinese American descent, and I think we would have guessed that probably even from she's got she's got this question for him about the sort of thing that's going to make Trump feel like he's being asked a nasty question. And in fact, he did label it that, a nasty question. I wasn't even really set to talk about this, but Bill brings up a good point. It's a pretty important story. The press conference from start to finish was kind of a joke, and that he showed up and had, basically a big mission accomplished banner out there. He had a banner made that says, "America leads the world in testing," which is true by absolute measures in terms of the number of tests that were administered or that have been administered in the United States. But of course, we're way behind some other leaders on per capita testing. We've been through the South Korea thing, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone kind of immediately recognized these banners as a sort of a mission accomplished thing. And in fact, that comes up in Laura Clausen's coverage from yesterday afternoon of the press conference. Let's see, does it identify the reporter? It does say, it just says, a reporter straight out asks Trump if he's saying mission accomplished. No, says Trump. We have prevailed on testing. For a change, he acknowledges the level of death the U.S. has experienced, but on testing, which he has for this occasion been told to talk about as important, where he usually does not, we have prevailed. Also some reports about his discussion of the number of deaths in the United States as also being a world-leading statistic and fantastic. And no, that's about as far from the truth as anything could possibly be. And I have at least one other story tucked away in pocket in which they said that's his biggest COVID-19 coronavirus lie to date, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Let's see. Do we have this exchange at the end captured in the coverage here? I don't think so, actually. So anyway, let's see. I know I certainly forwarded tweets about it yesterday, but the end of the exchange is what everyone was watching. And I guess I don't even remember exactly what the question was, but basically it was, how could you be sitting there saying that we've done a good job on anything when so many people have died and you suck so badly? And, well, his answer, as you might expect, was snippy and short, and he's yelling and berating the reporter. And part of the answer is, why don't you ask China that question? That's an interesting question. You should ask China that question. And a number of problems with doing that. Here we are. Aaron Rupar has captured the video of the moment. And I guess we could play the video. It's only about 30 seconds or so. But let's see. The first question is from the Post reporter. What is her name? It's like, is it Wei Jin? Isn't that her first name? I know I never really, Wei Jiang, is that her? Oh, she's from CBS. Okay, I thought she was a Washington Post reporter. You see, all media look alike to me, and it's very difficult for me to tell which media outlet they work for. Okay, so, here's the story from CNN covering this particular question. Yeah, Wei Jiang. I'm mangling her name, and she's on CBS, and if I watched enough TV, I would know the name's pronunciation by heart by now, because she's very prominent and has been very prominently featured in all of these exchanges because she's a tough questioner for Trump. And it's interesting now that the press are masked and Trump can't see because he's slowly going blind and is too vain to get any sort of help with that. She's seated toward the back now that I wonder if that had anything to do with the fight that they had the other day in the briefing room, trying to move the outlets that bother Trump to the back. But at any rate, they were outdoors yesterday. So Wei Jiang asks, what's the exchange? They talk about what the actual exchange is, or just a little, that's weird. Okay, why won't they just tell me what the story is? It's a little blurb about it, and then a picture, and then nothing. I guess, anyway, so he asks, or she asks the question about why your response is so terrible. Why don't you ask China? He's trying to blame the virus. Why are there so many people dead in the United States And isn't that your fault? No, ask China. It's China's fault. They're the one who did it. And, big problem with a response like that to anyone is you really should be dealing with this on your own level and not trying to blame China, and that's not going to fly. But then, in addition to it, she's very clearly Asian. I don't know whether she's Chinese American, but you would guess so from the name, but maybe not. And so she asks for a second, why did you tell me that? Why that answer for me in particular? Obviously the question being, is it because I'm Chinese American or look Chinese American? Is that what it's supposed to be? And he denies it, of course, and says, no, I tell that to everyone. China. But it takes her a minute to realize what's happening exactly and ask that follow-up question. Now, at that point is when, who's the other questioner? Caitlin, is it Collins? Is that her name? What am I thinking of? I'm terrible with the reporter names. At any rate, she's waiting to ask her question. Oh, yeah, sorry, I have the Aaron Rupar video on that one. Yeah, Caitlin Collins of CNN is next for questioning. So, but she pauses for a moment because Jiang is trying to follow up her insult, or the president's insult, with a question. Why are you insulting me? Is that because of who I am, or because of my background, my being Chinese American or Asian American? And while he's denying it, Caitlin Collins is about to ask her question, but backs off to give Jiang a chance to ask this question. Finally, when it becomes obvious that he's just going to duck and bob and weave and pretend he wasn't being racist. Okay, yes, Kate Sherrill, thank you for doing the production work on the side for Weijia is Chinese American. I thought so, but who knows, and don't want to get anybody upset if she's not. Anyway, Caitlin Collins at that point begins to ask her question. And it's, I guess, at that point that Trump figures out, oh, this is CNN now going to ask a question. As you know, I think they're fake news, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm not even going to really entertain the question. So he tries to come up with a reason why he doesn't have to, answer that question. And he just ducks the whole thing. He says, he calls on her. And maybe I should just pocket this thing, and then we'll play it on the main show computer here. This is a very difficult thing to kind of engineer on the fly. It's just a couple of clicks, but here we go. All right, let's see if we can't get the sound up on this thing too. I think it's going to be silenced at the beginning. Here it starts here with, we can now read Weijia Jiang's question here. Why is this a global competition to you when Americans are losing their lives every day? This was where he was saying we're doing great with death, or we're doing lots of testing, pulling out the testing metric and saying, well, we're doing great with that even if we're terrible on the deaths. And then, so that's an interesting question right up front. I mean, it doesn't even, that's why I guess it was so offensive that he answers with, you should ask China. It's not even something that he can blame on China. Why is it a global competition to you when Americans are losing their lives every day? Trump says, maybe that's a question you should ask China. And she says, why are you saying that to me specifically? I'm saying it to anybody who would ask a nasty question like that. And it's not a nasty question. It's not one he's likely to answer in any substantive way. I will say, it was good. There was a nice confrontation, but I don't know. I don't know if I would have selected that question as a way to get an answer of some interest out of Trump, although you did get the controversy out of it. Now, that's when Caitlin Collins tries to get her question. And this one we can roll here.
Okay. Anybody else? Please, go ahead in the back, please.
I have two questions.
No, it's okay.
But
We'll
you
go
pointed
here.
to me. I have two questions, Mr. President.
Next, please.
But you called on me.
I did, and you didn't respond, and now I'm calling on
Sorry, I just
the
wanted
young
to,
lady in the back, please.
I just wanted to let my colleague
Okay.
finish. But can I ask you a
Ladies and
question,
gentlemen,
please?
thank you very much. Appreciate
Will
it.
you call
Thank you
my-
very much.
And that's him leaving. So do you get what happened there? I mean, you saw the clip, I'm sure. But if by some chance you didn't and you are hearing it now for the first time, He points to Caitlin Collins, calls on her. She steps up, begins to ask her question. I think at that point he immediately realizes, oh, this is Caitlin Collins from CNN. The reporters, I don't know if it's the first time, but the reporters are masked now. And that's, I think, probably in part a result of the fact that there's coronavirus running rampant inside the White House. That's why the press conference was outside. It wasn't a nice day yesterday. It wasn't warm enough really to do it, but they did it anyway. And he can't see, and he can't see that far, and he can't see much at all, and he doesn't remember who people are. That I have the same problem as me. And then they're masked. So I think he really legitimately doesn't realize he's calling on Caitlin Collins from CNN. As soon as he realizes it, he says, no, he switches and points to somebody else. And she says, but you pointed to me. And then he comes up with the excuse, well, I did. I pointed to you, and then you didn't respond. And she says, I was waiting for you to finish discussing things with my colleague here, Wei Zhang, and he just says, well, you didn't respond. I called on you, didn't respond, so you forfeit your turn. So he's trying to point to somebody else. It's the young lady in the back, who's probably the OANN reporter or something like that. Anyway, or maybe not, because that reporter doesn't jump up and say anything. Maybe they're too courteous and too professional to jump in while he's having this exchange. And when he sees it's not going to work, his favorite trick of just simply, that's, in case you haven't noticed, when he has to deal with a hostile reporter, he just doesn't answer the question, yells at them, screams the thing he wants, and then points to another person and says, go ahead, please. But please, because he's so polite and courteous, he's getting pleased to the next person. And it's a question of whether or not the other person is going to be professional enough to let the prior questioner actually press the question and say, you didn't answer, come on, give me an answer, or whatever, or whether it's going to be somebody who's going to jump in, either because they want to ask their question and they're selfish, or because they know it's a lost cause for the prior questioner to even try. Anyway, I guess it didn't work, and the other questioner didn't stand up and come to the microphone to ask a question, so Trump ends the press conference instead. The last 10 seconds of the piece, the clip, I didn't even play it. It's just him walking out. It's not, oh, my dodge isn't working? All right, I'm out of here. 2 women ask me questions in a row, and I can't answer them, and I got to go. That's where we are, and it's rather a disgrace, and everyone should remember that. All right, let's see. Let me jump back into Pocket. There's a ton of things here today, Pocket and Twitter, that we could go forever. And let me see if I can't line up these stories and make some sense out of them. There's such a jumble from this morning. It really was incredible. Let's see. Brief news update just to let you know what's going on here. Happened to pick up this from Andrew Peng, an AP, is that what it says? The AP journalist. That's his handle on Twitter. Is he actually from AP, or does that mean something else? All right, well, at any rate, the AP, like Andrew Peng, I don't know, but I can't tell you. Maybe it's a joke. He's also from AP, because he's sharing a story that's datelined from the Associated Press, and his initials are AP. But anyway, this note from Moscow: Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has been hospitalized for coronavirus. That's pretty amazing. It's everywhere, and it's inside the governing offices of, pretty much every country that's trying to do battle with it. Russia, by the way, rapidly climbing up the ranks in the worldometers. I think I don't know whether I mentioned it on the air or not yesterday, but Russia now one of, is it 5 countries in the world? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries in the world with a total number of cases topping 200,000. Russia passed Italy a few days ago, and today they are sitting about 10,000 cases in the lead of the UK, and about 30,000 cases short of Spain. Of course, there are 1.1 million cases behind us, but they are climbing the charts rapidly. All right, let's see. So we got that news from out of Moscow. Supreme Court. Might as well set that stuff up too. Washington Post has got some good coverage on it. A lot of good commentary out there. Let me just run over and pick this one up because, let's see, I've got Steve Vladek's coverage. He's, of course, the guy from Just Security and always a good commentator on these issues. And I think, if I saw correctly a little earlier, we had, Aaron Blake's comment was, in fact, about Dr. Fauci's testimony later on. So perhaps we'll switch subjects to that later on. And in the meantime, Steve Vladek, writing at the Washington Post this time, I'm sure he also posted it over at Just Security. Your thoughts quite like it. Congress and Trump could both be losers at the Supreme Court this week. They could easily be losers at any given time. Oversight, though, could be crippled even if the justices rule against the White House. So let's just pick up on what's going on here. And we won't have a decision here today, but we'll just have arguments, and we'll get some inkling probably from court watchers which way they think things are going. I don't know how quickly they come back with this one. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments Tuesday in a pair of major separation of powers cases in which President Trump is suing several banks and one of his accounting firms to try to block them from complying with congressional subpoenas for his financial records. The president claims that the subpoenas go beyond Congress's oversight powers. But more than that, of course, he claims that there's no such power over him at all. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, the justices signaled that they may be looking for a way out. I sure would be. Asking the parties to file new briefs addressing whether federal courts can resolve such interbranch disputes in the first place. That's not the way out I was hoping for, but it's the way they would be most likely to grasp for, right? In other words, whether they present a political question that courts must abstain from deciding. A ruling that these disputes can be resolved only politically may be an attractive compromise to some of the justices, especially Chief Justice John Roberts, but it would be a terrible result for the separation of powers. Yes, that is absolutely true. Much like the Supreme Court's 1974 ruling requiring President Richard Nixon to comply with a subpoena for the Watergate tapes, such a ruling could well mean that the current president loses this particular battle, but that the presidency wins the war. At issue in the two cases, there's Trump versus Mazars and Trump versus Deutsche Bank, both being considered together today, is whether Congress, as part of its regulatory and oversight powers, has the constitutional authority to issue subpoenas for the president's personal financial records. Although the recipients of those subpoenas have suggested that they were willing to comply voluntarily, Trump sued to try to prevent them from doing so. Congress's power to issue subpoenas to private parties is well established and has been repeatedly sustained by the Supreme Court in cases dating back almost a century. But the justices have never squarely decided whether that power extends to subpoenas directed to or for the records of senior executive branch officials, including the president. After the lower courts turned away Trump's challenges, the Supreme Court not only granted certiorari, and in case you haven't been following along, that just means granting certiorari means, yes, we'll hear the case. And they don't have to. You don't get an appeal as of right. They have to decide that there's something worth their time on anything. Anyway, so the Supreme Court not only granted certiorari, or you'll sometimes hear lawyers say cert for short, but put those rulings on hold, that is the lower court rulings turning away Trump's challenges, put those rulings on hold pending its disposition of the president's appeals. That means if the Supreme Court holds that Trump's suits should not have been brought in the first place, his accountants and bankers would be free to comply with Congress's requests. A parallel line of cases has arisen from defiance of congressional subpoenas by executive branch and former executive branch officials, including former White House counsel Donald McGahn, in which Congress has sued to seek enforcement of its subpoenas. So you see that that comes from a slightly different angle. We have Congress issuing subpoenas to Trump's accountants and banks, saying, give us the records. And I don't think this one even includes the taxes, which is a slightly different question. But at any rate, Congress issuing subpoenas to the accountant and the banks and saying, give us the information, and Trump suing and saying they shouldn't be able to comply voluntarily or otherwise with this because this infringes on my privacy rights. And then there's another line of cases in which the Congress subpoenas Don McGahn, at that point a former executive branch official, former White House counsel, and Trump saying, well, no, there's a privilege there too. He was my White House counsel, and even though he no longer is, I can block him from testifying because he was an executive branch employee. So two different claims, but both claims basically based on nothing. That is to say, there's really no legal precedent for disputing those subpoenas, and so they came up with, well, what kind, you say you have some kind of immunity. I've never heard of any kind of immunity that would block those subpoenas. So they said, absolute immunity. How about that? And they essentially made up this claim of absolute immunity and just said, let's roll the dice. Maybe 5 justices can be brought around to allowing the Republican president, the president who shares a political party with them, to get away with it. And that's all it is. And that's why I say we may find out that we're just pre-wrong about all these things. That's my sort of pet terminology for when in an exercise of pure power play partisanship, 5 justices just say everything everybody thought they knew about the law and how it works is wrong, and not that we're changing precedent, but that the whole world was wrong and didn't know it and was just waiting for this moment when the 5 of us would get our heads together to come around to tell you that you've always been wrong and all the previous cases are decided wrongly. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Before jumping back to Steve Vladek's coverage of what's going on in the Supreme Court, I think I'll just take a moment to note for the record, The Hill reporting that the Colorado restaurant that we were talking about yesterday that opened for Mother's Day and became the subject of that if not viral, then rather, popular, I guess, a popular video. And people loved to hate it, I guess. The video of their crowds at Mother's Day, and we were wondering why nothing happened to them. Colorado restaurant sees license suspended after reopening in defiance of state order on Mother's Day. Pretty interesting. I won't read the entire article, but I'll just refer you to it and put it in the roundup, I guess. But I'd like to see what happens going forward. I suppose if you're willing to open up in defiance of the closure orders, it's entirely possible that she might try to make a martyr of herself and open in defiance of losing her license as well. And, that'll just lead us to a situation in which armed patriots say licensing restaurants so that they serve us healthful and unadulterated food is unconstitutional. We want poison. And, you'd think that would be far-fetched except for the fact that they're out in the middle of a pandemic with no protection whatsoever. So clearly they do want to be poisoned. So maybe it's a small leap from that to the next position. Anyway, just thought you might like to know that at least the authorities in Colorado did do something. We'll see whether that makes any difference in whether or not they're open. And and where that goes from here. All right, so let's see. We left off with Steve Vladeck saying that a parallel line of cases has arisen from defiance of congressional subpoenas by the executive branch, talking specifically about Don McGahn's case. And I was explaining the pre-wrong concept to those who may have joined us less than several years ago when we last, I think, discussed that terminology that I like to use, a pre-wrong. You were all just wrong and you didn't know it. And it took the five of us geniuses to convince you that everything you learned from Schoolhouse Rock forward isn't true. I mean, it really was true this whole time, but it was secretly not true and you didn't know it. But this was knowledge we had to reveal to you. And it's not, I'm not alone in thinking about that. I guess there's a more elegant way of putting it, that Federalist Society judges and Scalia types and arch conservatives used to use back in the day to express a similar sentiment. They used to claim that they were adherents of the Constitution in exile, they used to say. That there was the true controlling precedent and the true controlling interpretation of the Constitution was out there, and it was always true, but that America had been wandering around with blinders on since the New Deal or thereabouts, and that they were the ones that were going to bring back the true originalist interpretation of the Constitution, limited government, et cetera, plus, whatever the hell they wanted to do. Essentially gimmitarian approach to everything, but they didn't know that then. But that all of this was true and would now be revealed truth as soon as there were enough of them on the Supreme Court to remind everybody that, oh, yeah, we lost our way and forgot what the Constitution was about in late 20s, early 30s. And it's taken us a long time to get back to the original intent of the Constitution. And sometimes we'll hear, even if they don't use the terminology of the Constitution in exile, you'll sometimes hear people refer to the Lochner case as the turning point and all this. And we're not going to do a seminar on Lochner, but that I think also exhibits the same sort of sentiment, that was wrongly decided, and it set off a chain reaction in the way the Supreme Court and the federal courts from there on in interpreted everything. And if that had been decided correctly, we wouldn't have had all these mistakes, and the Constitution would not have had to survive in exile. Where did it live while it was in exile? In the brains, in the minds of these conspirators who always felt that if they just got 5 of them onto the Supreme Court at the same time, they would be able to undo all of this with their awesome powers, and no one would be able to gainsay it because that's the way the system works. 5 justices say that I guess now we'd be talking about 100 years or so of federal law and judicial precedent is out the window. Now that seems like a big deal, but it's not, because it's totally justified. It's not just 5 people making up their minds that they want something other than what now 320 million people thought was reality, but that they're rescuing the Constitution from exile. That was a phrase that did an awful lot of work, right? That was supposed to be, because it had the words Constitution in it. And exile, that seems like a pretty serious situation, right? Constitution, that's a serious word. Exile, that's a serious situation. It's not that they're simply using gimmitarianism to overturn everything that made this country stable and prosperous for the past 100 years, give or take, half of it. But anyway, we always had the illusion of it. So it's not that we're just undoing everything. It's that, you see, we're rescuing the Constitution. That's why it's okay for us to stand everything on its head. All right. Well, I think that explains things. We can now move on with the specifics of what's happening this week. So Steve Vladeck continues. In February, a divided 3-judge panel of the D.C. Federal Appeals Court held that Congress could not use the courts to enforce such subpoenas, like against McGahn, because Article 3 of the Constitution forbids federal courts from resolving this kind of interbranch information dispute. That's a terrible decision. But that decision has already been vacated by the full Court of Appeals, which heard the argument last month. Now, similar reasoning seems to be the motivation for the April order from the Supreme Court, which could see the Trump cases, these ones that are being argued today against Mazars, the accountants, and Deutsche Bank, or involving them, and Deutsche Bank, the bankers, right? Today's cases, the justices could see the Trump cases as an opportunity to hold that all interbranch information disputes have to be resolved politically and not judicially. In cases like McGahn's, where the recipient of a subpoena does not wish to comply, such a ruling would leave Congress with no mechanism for enforcing its subpoenas beyond its own coercive powers, which include, let's see he includes them all, okay, which include spending cutoffs, that was always out there, inherent contempt, we had a lot of educating to do to get people ready for that one, and in extreme cases, resurrecting the long-dormant power of the House and Senate Sergeant-at-Arms to arrest and detain recalcitrant witnesses, which is really, ought to have been included under inherent contempt. But I'm glad he brought that out as a specific call out. That's how you would enforce inherent contempt, and it's worth separating the two to be accurate. But I'm glad that we got an actual mention of what that means. Indeed, for former executive branch officials such as McGahn, the last option may well be the only available one, raising the rather disturbing specter of armed confrontations between the legislative and executive branches. That would be really interesting, in particular in McGahn's case, because he's not an executive branch official. It would be really interesting to see whether executive branch law enforcement officials were ordered and did comply with orders to stand against congressional officers trying to arrest someone who's not an executive branch official. But, what do they care what the justification is? We got our orders, let's go. As long as they're willing to execute them, I guess they'll do anything. Anyway, I'm kind of glad we're here. I mean, it's a disaster that we're here, but I'm kind of glad we're here because, well, if you've been following the show or following what I've been writing about for, probably going on about 111 years at this point. I've been saying that for quite a long time. And if you weren't around back in the day, you can poke around over at dailycoast.com and find out about inherent contempt and essentially all the roots of the discussion of it at Daily Coast, whether they remember it now or not, trace back to what I wrote about it in, which I guess we're talking about 12, 13 years ago, 2006, 7 perhaps, when we were discussing that. All right. Now Stephen Vladeck, who's organized his thoughts. So, if the Supreme Court holds that these two cases are not justiciable, the immediate loser may well be Trump, especially if Mazars and Deutsche Bank choose to comply with the congressional subpoenas. But in the long-term loser clearly would be Congress. Such a split verdict may help explain why, in the briefs filed in response to the justice's invitation, each of the parties urged the court to reach the merits of the Trump argument. Otherwise, lawmakers would be left either to try far more coercive measures to compel the executive branch to comply with each individual information request, even mundane ones, or to settle for a significant loss of their ability to conduct meaningful oversight of the administration, or any administration, really. If this story sounds familiar, that's because it is, and not just because I've told it before. In 1974, after the Watergate special prosecutor issued a subpoena to Nixon for tapes from the White House recording system, the president fought the subpoena all the way to the Supreme Court. In a unanimous ruling widely understood as a hard-fought compromise, the Supreme Court held that Nixon had to comply with the subpoena, but only after recognizing, for the first time, that the Constitution itself recognizes an executive privilege that protects most internal confidential presidential communications from compelled disclosure to Congress or prosecutors. So, I guess that too, not some long-treasured, long-held belief in executive privilege, but an invention of the 1970s out of necessity. Although, certainly it traces its roots to what they think is constitutional reasoning. By holding that such a privilege was grounded in the Constitution, the justices delivered a huge victory to the executive branch, even as it ruled against the president, that particular president, on the specifics. Nixon lost, but the presidency won. The Nixon decision is more than just a parallel to the to the present. In many ways, the justices' recognition of a constitutionally grounded executive privilege. And it's not in there. You can look all over the place. Their recognition of this privilege in 1974 is indirectly responsible for today's impasse, in which Congress has largely been left to issue subpoenas to former government officials such as McGahn or third parties such as Mazars if it wants to conduct meaningful oversight of the Trump White House. As it turns out, litigation over claims of executive privilege has proven to be time-consuming and has not tended to produce definitive answers. As with the recognition of executive privilege in the Nixon case, a ruling in the Trump cases that courts must stay out of these disputes also would inevitably tilt the separation of powers further in favor of the executive branch, as Congress will be left to choose between little, if any, oversight and direct confrontation every time it seeks any information from anyone in the federal bureaucracy. As in Nixon's case, and before I continue on, realize what he's saying here when he means it. Direct confrontation every time Congress seeks any information from anyone in the federal bureaucracy. Trump has made his policy explicit. There will be no compliance with any subpoenas of any kind from anyone in Congress for any reason, mostly out of spite and anger over having seen so many subpoenas issued during the Russia investigation and Ukraine investigation. So more than simply saying, well, we won't comply with any subpoena requests or any document requests that don't involve subpoenas, just a request. We won't answer any of their questions. You know how Trump works. Everything's on the table at all times. So if you're pestering him about Ukraine and he gets mad about it, a slightly less insane president might say, all right, that's it. Look, we're done complying with Ukraine-related requests. But if you want to subpoena someone from the National Weather Service to discuss, tornado prediction enhancements, whatever, fine, go ahead. But Trump just said, well, I control this whole federal apparatus and I'm going to punish Congress that way. So no information from the National Weather Service, no information from the IRS, no information from Fish and Wildlife Service. Doesn't matter. If Congress wants it from the executive branch, they're not going to get it. So at this point, you have to subpoena Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service to get them to comply because they're political appointees that sit atop these bureaus and the departments that supervise them instruct everyone not to comply because the president's mad about other stuff. So you would literally you got to subpoena them and they'll fight the subpoena and you'll have to now be arresting bureaucrats at these, tiny agencies who want nothing more than to do the routine interactions between the Hill and the executive branch that get them funded each year, but are instructed by the president, no, you must treat this as a standoff, and there have to be guns involved. So anyway, realize what that's involving here. As in Nixon's case, he continues, Trump would lose, but the institution of the presidency would win. That may feel like a compromise to at least some of the justices, but the only thing it would really compromise is the balance of power among the three branches. And I probably just should have spat that out because that's actually the end of the article. And so I should have done that instead of taking that detour. But I think that's a very important point to realize, and I'm not sure everybody gets it entirely. All right, jumping back to an earlier topic, Mike Musson reminds me of, yes, another thing that I did put aside in pocket, but he was reminded by the Trump thing saying, ask China, ask China. They point out here, the Chinese now moving, oh good, there's an article here because I couldn't find it. I found it in Twitter, like one of those Twitter moments, but there was no article attached to it. But thank you for sending this one to us, Michael, this one from the Washington Post. Put it away in pocket. What's happening? After 6 new cases, Wuhan plans to test all 11 million residents for coronavirus. They're worried about another wave breaking out, and what does this mean, and how? I guess this could have implications for the question of how long does immunity last if you have been exposed to the coronavirus and recovered from illness, or developed antibodies and never developed any symptoms, whatever it is. How long does this last? Or is this just a freak thing, or these people who somehow weren't exposed before? Now, this is really something. Testing 11 million people, although maybe they're doing it out of spite. They hate Trump saying, we've done more testing than anybody. And they have the ability to force everybody to stay home and do nothing until the authorities arrive and test people. So they might actually be able to pull that off. They're going to retest 11 million people in the Wuhan province. And Trump, yesterday, trumpeting our world-leading status, we've conducted just over 9.6 million tests this whole time. Wuhan says they're going to do 11 million. I don't know how long they think it's going to take them. But, all right, we'll see what happens, to borrow a phrase again from Trump. By the way, second leading tester in the world, the Russians that I just told you have been racing up the charts. 5.8 million tests. So that's far and away the most tests. America, 9.6 million. Russia, 5.8 million. Next leading contender, we can sort these charts by each of the categories. Germany, with 2.7 million tests. So just for the record here, 1.3 million cases in the United States, 232,000 cases in Russia, 172,000 cases in Germany. How are they doing? I don't think we can say the Russians are necessarily being completely honest with their numbers, but they don't have near the numbers of deaths that we do. Germany has more deaths, but at any rate, I guess 9.6 million tests for us, 5.8 for the Russians, 2.7 for the Germans. 14 deaths per million population in Russia, 91 deaths per million population in Germany, 247 deaths per million in the United States. So most tests of anyone in the world, but, in terms of deaths and the death rate per capita, yeah, not doing so good. I mentioned to you also that that, I guess, was another claim that was put out there that was one of the big lies. Oh, yes, right. So Aaron Blake pointing out, maybe I can just grab his comment from his tweet rather than the entirety of the article, but I thought he summed it up pretty well. Let's see. Did he say it in his tweet? This feels like some pretty... Oh, no, that was another tweet. Okay, so Aaron Blake is on both fronts on this one. Trump's claim, this might be the wrongest thing Trump has said about coronavirus, says Aaron Blake in the full article. Obviously made crazy claims about the coronavirus, but Monday's news briefing, the first in weeks in which Trump and his coronavirus task force officials took questions, he offered one of his biggest whoppers yet. After being asked about a mysterious condition affecting children, we never did discuss that on the air, but I did try to give you those articles about what's going on with the Kawasaki disease and inflammatory disorders in children that they're discovering now in connection with coronavirus. So, but asked her a question about that, then having a task force member, in this case, Admiral Brett Giroir. Is that Giroir? Is that how he says his last name? I don't know. But the Admiral corrected Trump that the condition had actually proven fatal, I guess Trump tried to say, but no children have died from it, but they have. Trump turned to better news, or at least what he wrongly stated was better news. And here the quote, I think one of the things we're most proud of, this just came out, deaths per 100,000 people. Death, Trump said. It's usually by a million, but I guess somebody might do it by 100,000. So deaths per 100,000 people. Germany and the United States are at the lowest rung of that ladder, meaning low is a positive, not a negative. Germany, the United States are the two best in deaths per 100,000 people, which frankly, to me, that's perhaps the most important number there is. Well, Blake says it would be perhaps the most important number if it were anywhere close to true. I mean, it's still an important number, whether it's true or not. But it would be better for Trump if it were true. It would be better for all of us. We'd be alive. It's true that while the United States has the most confirmed coronavirus cases and the most confirmed coronavirus deaths, it lags behind some Western European countries when it comes to per capita deaths. I wrote about this a week ago, Aaron says, noting that the raw number can be deceiving when it comes to the total impact on countries. But the U.S. is nowhere close to having one of the lowest per capita death rates. In fact, according to data from Johns Hopkins University, we rank 9th highest out of more than 140 countries for which information is available. If you focus on Western Europe, which Trump didn't, the United States ranks behind the following countries on per capita deaths: Germany, Switzerland, Portugal, Poland, Austria, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland. Here's a chart comparing the 30 countries with the highest per capita death rates. And I've been looking at that for a long time over at Worldometers, and so the numbers are fairly similar. Top of the charts, and there's no way of catching up. Don't worry about it. But what you begin to notice is that the size of the countries that actually exceed our per capita deaths gives away the game. San Marino is tops on the list at 121.36 deaths per 100,000 people. Worldometers uses deaths per 1 million population. But San Marino obviously is going to stand there, and all you got to do is move the decimal point. 1,208 deaths per million, or as Blake reports that Johns Hopkins has it, 121.36 deaths per 100,000. So I'll run down the list without bothering with the numbers. It's just a tongue twister. San Marino, Belgium, larger, like it's not that any of these are not legit countries, but you know what I mean. Legit, but small. San Marino, Belgium, Andorra, another one of these micro countries. Spain, big country. Italy, relatively big. Britain, France, Netherlands, Sweden, whoops, good job over there, Sweden. Ireland, United States. Then, by the way, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Canada, big. Ecuador, Portugal. Remember Ecuador? We mentioned them a couple weeks back. Monaco, no. Germany, Denmark, Iran, Austria, Peru, Panama, Brazil, Romania, Slovenia, Finland, Moldova, Turkey, and Estonia. Estonia down at the bottom there. 4.54 deaths per 100,000. United States, 24. So, pretty significant. San Marino, no catching up to them. Does everyone know where San Marino is? I mean, what are they, like northeastern Italy? I mean, they're not Italy, but right up there. So, essentially a neighbor to the hot spot in Italy, but with 10 people in the country. I don't know how many people are in San Marino. But, that's not going to come out well. That's obviously true. Over at Worldometer, where they have, in addition to the countries listed, they also have some of the territories, and what do they put it in an interesting way on Worldometers about countries and territories, and what else do they say? Conveyances, even. So anyway, some pretty microscopic things. So they have it as San Marino, Belgium, Andorra, Spain, Italy, UK, France, St. Martin, Sweden. Sweden, really not doing a great job with that. Netherlands, small-ish, but okay. Ireland, yes, we all know. Isle of Man comes up next, and then USA. The U.S. is sandwiched between the Isle of Man and the other Channel Islands outside of the UK, and then Switzerland, Montserrat, Luxembourg. You get the idea of what's going on with this. All right, so big whopper from Trump. He's lying wildly about it. And, all right, there's more to Blake's report on it, but I think that gets you the gist of what's going on here. All right, but thank you, Michael, for reminding us that was the case and bringing things back to that. All right, let's see. Other things in pocket. It's a wild day here today. We'll see what maybe there's another short bit we can cram in between now and the next break. Let me see if we can't roll down this thing. What is this? Really? Is this going on here? Coronavirus. U.S. suspends travel from Europe. Why is that in here? This seems out of place. Oh, okay. I guess that's what comes up in Pocket. Isn't that ancient news at this point? That's what comes up in Pocket when I bookmarked the 11 million testing plan in the Twitter moment. All right, let's see if maybe we can just sample a minute's worth of what's happening in Wuhan and how they plan to do this thing. And Field, I don't know, sorry, in Washington Post writing this one. Authorities in the Chinese city of Wuhan plan to test all 11 million residents by the end of next week. That really sounds ambitious, even for the Chinese. But boy, if they can pull that one off. Do you think they're doing it because of necessity, or do you think they just want to wrest the title away from Donald Trump? I don't know. But I'd love to know what the results are. So a massive push to extinguish any remnants of the virus from the original epicenter of the global pandemic. The all-encompassing mission announced Monday and paid for by district governments contrasts with shortages of testing kits in some other countries, this one, where people have complained about not being able to get a test despite having coronavirus symptoms. And of course, Trump still sticks to anyone who can get a test can get it. Just walk in wherever or drive through wherever and get it. And he's being called out on that one daily. The scope of the endeavor underscores official sensitivities about any new flare-up in Wuhan, where the virus emerged in a market late last year, as opposed to our wet markets like the cafes of Castle Rock, Colorado. And, I don't know why we should find ourselves surprised about that. We should be calling those things wet markets. There's such a huge negative connotation that goes with that. We ought to live up to that. That's why I've never understood why people who go out hunting and shoot deer then come home and complain about crazy ethnic people from other parts of the world who eat bushmeat and cause these virus outbreaks. You're doing the same thing. Anyway, I don't know. We're not going to get any more detail about how they figure to pull this off, just that they want to over in China. Amazing feat, and I'd love to know what the results are. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. 10 o'clock hour has arrived, and so it's time for Dr. Fauci's testimony, apparently, to begin on Capitol Hill. So let's see. Story I have on that. If you've got to watch and you want one eye on it, it's going to be on C-SPAN 3, apparently, if you happen to be one of the people who have that on their cable system, fine. Otherwise, of course, you can find them at C-SPAN at their website. And you can, let's see, what did they give what the site is? I mean, remember that their website is c-span.org. And then you can navigate your way around there from there. Does it make it plain where to go to get it? I hope so. Yeah, there we go. They got 1, 2, 3 listed over on the other side. Lots going on. The Supreme Court oral argument on the Trump cases, I guess, going on as well on C-SPAN 1, and then something else, some other crazy thing happening on 2. 3, the White House Coronavirus Task Force members testify on coronavirus response and reopening phases over on Capitol Hill before who? Senate. Yeah, the Senate Help Committee, H-E-L-P, Health, Education, Labor, and what's the P? I can't even remember anymore. What is that? Why don't I remember that? Let's go look it up because I hate not knowing. Health, Education, Labor, and come on now, I got to click all the way through here. Pensions. All right, yeah, no wonder I forgot about pensions. Everyone forgets about pensions. Hardly ever even exist anymore. They're mostly being stolen by vulture, locust, capitalist types. Okay, let's see. So that's going on during the 10 o'clock hour. Don't know what Joan's status is on that one, but we may find out soon enough, and I would certainly understand if she wanted to keep an eye on that one. Let's see, other short notes, I guess, that I can share. Now I find all the short stuff. Let's see. I thought this was an interesting short note. Sean Trendy at Real Clear Politics, who I usually don't follow or listen to, and I don't know how it got into my timeline, but it did. That's okay. I'm not mad about it. We hear about him from Greg all the time, saying a friend of mine, who he describes parenthetically as a former libertarian local office holder in Virginia. Now it makes me curious about it. It must have been Greg retweeting it because I see him in the comments down here. A friend of mine, a former Libertarian office holder in Virginia, writes about mask wearing. And you know how Libertarians tend to feel about mask wearing. This is a contrarian Libertarian take. Joan, by the way, notes should be able to join us for the last half hour. So that gives us some space to talk about what Sean is talking to his friends about. But actually something it appears to be pro-mask wearing and explaining it in a way that might, I guess if there's any chance of getting through to the right-wing loons who insist that this is such an imposition on their civil rights, their personal liberties. We couldn't convince them with the people peeing on each other or peeing in their pants explanation. That didn't faze them for some reason. But maybe this would do it because this is such a tough guy, manly explanation. This is great. What a great thought. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but I'll take it. Here's the explanation. He says, maybe it's not even a he. I don't know. But he says, it's like trigger discipline. Guns. Now you're talking my language. Rrr, say the lunatics. You don't, for the most part, exercise trigger discipline for your own safety. Partially. Anyway, you do it, though, for the safety of others. And does everybody know what trigger discipline is, by the way? Probably, if you've been following the show since we were concentrating more heavily on gun failure, you probably would know. But if you ever see pictures of the right-wing loons marching around with their AR-15s, and you've ever wondered, if you don't know what this is about, why do all the gun nuts love to have their pictures taken holding their AR-15s and sticking their index fingers out along the side of the rifle, almost sort of like making gun fingers, as it were, instead of having their finger on the trigger where they can shoot people right away and kill lots of people. Wouldn't you want your finger on the trigger where you can set off your machine guns? No. The gun training, formal gun training, teaches you keep your hand off your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And of course, you don't shoot until you know exactly what you're shooting at. You've ascertained what your target is, what's behind the target, and you're at that point where you are ready to kill something or someone if you bring your gun up. So you don't point it at anything that you don't intend to kill, and you don't put your finger on your trigger until you're ready to shoot, and you're not ready to shoot until you know what you're shooting and what's behind what you're shooting, et cetera, et cetera. The cardinal rules of gun safety. So they make it ritualistic. You keep your finger up here, and you're very conscious of it. Put your finger up on the rack, on the railing of the gun here, to keep it away from the trigger and to show that you're not at that ready to shoot moment. That's trigger discipline. And you find failures of it all the time. And very famously, Brandon Friedman and others love to point out the lack of trigger discipline among people who get brand new guns for Christmas and then take pictures of it and circulate it on social media. All right, so you don't usually do that for the most part for your own safety. You do it for the safety of others. The entire rules of safe firearm handling can be described that way, actually, right? Do it mostly for the safety of others. If you called me out for not exercising trigger discipline, if you're a decent person, like this guy apparently is, I would thank you and practice it. Of course, in reality, people say, F you, I'll blow your face off, but whatever. If I held out my finger and flexed it and said, "This is my safety, sir," you'd call me a dick and kick me off the range, as well you should, right? Like if you, a lot of people, say, why don't you have the safety of your gun on, etc. This is my safety, right? So that's something they come up with. Well, anyway, you'd call me a dick and kick me off the range, as well you should. Wear a goddamn mask, although he says GD. Wear a GD mask. Wash it every day or get several so you can switch them out and keep it sanitary. Get one silk screened with the message, "Wearing a mask seems stupid, but I guess I will do it in the slight chance that I don't transmit to you." but if you wish, but wear a damn mask. It really isn't that much of a sacrifice. As a matter of fact, I'm having a hard time understanding how it is any sacrifice. Not wearing a mask just looks like simple contrarianism to me. Well, it is, but that's what libertarianism looks like to me, so I can understand that. But it's nice to see that I don't know whether he's a former libertarian or just a former office holder, but anyway, he's described that way. And hopefully that's a catching position. And maybe you might be able to convince right-wing lunatics using the trigger discipline thing. You practice that, right? You have the right to put your finger on the trigger and to keep it there, but you know that it doesn't keep the people around you safe. And to the extent that you are carrying those weapons with that as your excuse, why don't you want to do the same thing with your mouth that you do with your finger? And I guess I should mention nose too, since so many people for some reason wear it under their nose. I don't really know why that is. All right, let's see. Other short-ish notes. This is an interesting one from down in Georgia. Of course, the developments in the Arbery case. Am I pronouncing the last name correctly? The young black man who was shot and killed by the two white dudes, allegedly, they were saying, patrolling their neighborhood to watch out for burglars, and they just jumped out and shot this guy. Everyone's seen the tape. We know the story by now. Just mentioning that according to this Twitter stream, what I'm seeing here, and the Twitter account is Redfish Stream, and I don't know anything about it, and it's based in Berlin, and why am I depending on them for this news? But, I don't know. It says it's showing me pictures of Black Panthers joining Arbery's family on a walk for justice in his memory, and they are there in the full getup of combat fatigues of sorts and their weapons and wearing masks because coronavirus. And that's pretty interesting. That could lead to something constructive, or it could lead to just their a renewed call for gun control, as it did the first time the Black Panthers started showing up armed in California, or an armed confrontation along the lines of, hooray, this is the race war we've always been hoping for from the right-wing lunatics. Although my guess is that it will keep local yahoos who ride around in the backs of pickup trucks to shoot black guys quiet. Whether it draws a larger crowd of 3%ers and oath keepers down to walk to protect racists who want to counter-protest against the people on marches for justice, I guess is yet to be seen. But I just wanted to make note of the fact that that's happening in case it heats up or explodes while we're looking the other way. And there are so many things to look at, including a reminder, which I guess I'll throw out here as well, although this might be something Joan wants to discuss, maybe not. I'll save her the time if she wants to concentrate her fire elsewhere. Today is the election day, special election for California's 25th congressional district, where our Democratic, what is the word I'm looking for? The Democratic nominee here, candidate, Christy Smith. Boy, I probably should have just gone straight to that. Christy Smith, the Democrat. If you're in the region, of course, make sure your vote gets counted. Make sure if you're mailing in your ballot, it's postmarked by today. Apparently, there's some danger of the Republican candidate actually winning that seat back, and I guess that's the key word, back. Trump and the Republicans are set to crow over any victory that they might be able to pull out there, and it looks like it might be possible for them to do that. But the area has been, for the most part, rather traditionally Republican. This was the place where Trump was complaining about, they're going to vote by mail, so it's rigged. And then they said, we're going to have some live voting booths for people who prefer to do that. That's rigged too, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to stop them from stealing this whole thing. And anyway, I assume that he was pushed into doing that in addition to his regular ranting, because there was some chance that, yes, a Republican could win there, because Republicans held the seat for a long time until 2018, when I can't even remember what was the one of the many Katies that was elected to Congress, but the one who had to resign over her personal issues. And at any rate, she's now this election to replace her. And I guess it's kind of a toss-up. But Republicans, I guess, are poised to crow about, stealing back a Democratic seat, but it really was never a Democratic seat. But though it would be nice to keep it in our hands. And if you're in the 25th District, well, make sure you do your part. And apparently, turnout's been a little spotty, and some questions about whether the younger voters are mailing those ballots in or showing up to cast those ballots. So hopefully, if you're in the 25th District or know someone who is, you've pushed them out to the polls, and you'll push somebody else out there too. All right, let's see. Continuing on, we got a few more minutes before we hit our break and into our last half hour where we can talk to Joan. And let me see what we have put aside here. Why is this not identifying itself? Yes. Okay. So by way of previewing the testimony, and I guess now it's no longer a preview, of Anthony Fauci on Capitol Hill, that was where I had an Aaron Blake tweet, his commenting on the Times coverage of the upcoming event. He said, "This feels like some pretty aggressive pushback from Fauci on reopening." You may have seen his comments basically saying, yeah, some needless suffering and death in store for us if we reopen too quickly. That is pretty aggressive pushback. Also, completely notable, Blake says, that he sought to preview his testimony at all in the first place. The point being here that I guess he wanted to get it out there and on the record before he found himself somehow squelched by the Trump administration. New York Times covering it this way: Fauci to warn Senate of needless suffering and death. That sounds like a good warning. The risks of reopening the country too soon will be a focus of government hearings Tuesday. The White House's new mask requirement won't apply to President Trump. That much they were able to tell us. So, okay, Fauci will be out there hopefully telling it like it is, and maybe that he's doing it right now. I guess there's probably no point in reading through a preview since it's happening at the moment. I guess another discussion of some note happening over in the Atlantic. It'll seem like old news to the rest of us. But Michael Steinberger writing, "Why no one is calling on Trump to resign. Trump's shamelessness, his unwillingness to express contrition, seems to have become a kind of shield." Kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I think we've all sort of felt it innately. In late March, the Boston Globe published an editorial excoriating President Donald Trump over his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, even that early. It said that Trump was epically outmatched by the public health emergency, and that his callousness, self-concern, and lack of compass had plunged the country into disaster. It did. Trump, the Globe declared in its headline, had blood on his hands. But the editorial was also notable for what it didn't say. Even as the paper held Trump personally responsible for the likely deaths of thousands of Americans, it did not demand his resignation. Instead, the Globe concluded that the best we could hope for was a reckoning come Election Day for the lives lost and for the vast avoidable suffering about to ensue under the president's watch. The Globe editorial highlighted one of the more puzzling aspects of the COVID-19 crisis. Despite Trump's egregious failure, hardly anyone has called on him to resign. During Watergate, numerous demands were made for Nixon to step down. Some 30 newspapers, including the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, urged President Bill Clinton to quit over the Monica Lewinsky scandal. In the face of Trump's catastrophic ineptitude, as well as his obvious indifference to the pain he has inflicted on the country, how has the only nationally influential voice to demand his resignation been Howard Stern? That is a good question. Because, never mind. Anyway, the fact that no one believes Trump would heed the call to resign is beside the point. No one thought Clinton would resign either. Curious to know why the Globe stopped short of asking Trump to leave office, I reached out to Bina Venkataraman, I'm guessing. She's the paper's editorial page editor. I'm guessing? I don't know. Anyway, yes, she told me by mail that the editorial board had considered demanding Trump's resignation most recently over the Ukraine scandal that led to his impeachment. But to date, it has refrained from taking that step. She said that an election year raises the bar in terms of the rationale and timing that would justify doing so. Whatever. However, she emphasized that the Globe had not ruled out the possibility. When we deliberate about such questions, she told me, we consider all kinds of factors, including the timing, the potential to influence the outcome, whether it's the best position to take for the country in the moment, as well as for institutions and democratic norms over the long run, and what precedents it sets for the editorial board. She also pointed out that the paper had recently called on Attorney General William Barr to step down over what it alleged was his serial misconduct. It's true. It's worth noting, too, that the Globe columnist Michael Cohen, although not a member of the editorial board, has demanded Trump's resignation several times. The Princeton University historian Julian Zelizer thinks the fact that Trump so recently survived impeachment is probably another reason editorial pages and congressional Democrats have been loath to demand his resignation. But he suggests that deeper factors may also be at work. Zelizer says that after decades of anti-government rhetoric from the right, a lot of Americans have come to expect that Washington will fail them. And this has shaped how the country responds to incompetent leadership. That's kind of weak. It's this feeling that this is the best we can get, he says. The degree to which we have become inured to failure, he says, was vividly demonstrated during George W. Bush's presidency. That's true. Even though Bush presided over a series of historic disasters, 9/11, the Iraq War, Hurricane Katrina, and the global financial meltdown, that's a lot. He served 2 full terms in office. I wish it was in Congress. Our political culture does seem to have developed a high tolerance for failure. As the CIA director under Bush, George Tenet oversaw 2 intelligence debacles, 9/11 and the Iraq War. Yet he kept his job until June of 2004, more than a year into the Iraq fiasco, at which point he insisted he was not leaving in shame or disgrace. He told CIA employees it was a personal decision and had only one basis. In fact, the well-being of my wonderful family. Nothing more, nothing less. How they doing? By the way, I'm just curious. Business culture has perhaps also numbed us to the prospect of failure without consequence. In the corporate world, poor performance is no impediment to lavish compensation. When the Boeing CEO, Dennis Muhlenberg, is that how he pronounces it? It's spelled different than the college, was fired last December after 2 737 MAX planes crashed and the entire fleet was grounded. He walked away with a $62 million payout. Executives seem to rake in millions no matter how badly their companies fare. Beyond matters of culture, Trump's shamelessness, his unwillingness to express contrition, seems to have become a kind of shield. While Joe Biden is under fire because of a claim of sexual assault dating back almost 3 decades, with the New York Times demanding an investigation and some commentators urging the Democratic Party to ditch its presumptive nominee, sexual assault allegations against Trump, such as the one by E. Jean Carroll last year, barely register. Why the contrasting treatment? Biden's critics recognize that the former vice president can be made to take responsibility for his actions, whereas Trump seems impervious to opprobrium, whether over sexual misconduct or his lethal incompetence. So, we march on towards 100,000 coronavirus deaths, resigned for now to Trump's diseased presidency. But if these factors explain why almost no one in a position of authority or influence is saying that Trump should go, they hardly justify the silence. On the contrary, the silence is yet another indication of how warped our politics has become. Stephen Kaplan, a professor emeritus at Cornell University who taught French history and now lives in Paris, full disclosure, he's a friend, told me that if Emmanuel Macron had screwed up as badly as Trump has, he would have been the object of serious and repeated calls for resignation. The same would surely be the case for Justin Trudeau and Angela Merkel. Zelizer of Princeton thinks future historians will be astonished that Trump's failure was tolerated to the point that his resignation wasn't even part of the conversation. I think we will look back and ask why people weren't more furious, he says. Where was the outrage? Well, that old question. It's a good question. Of course, ask me here, I'll tell you, we're beyond resignation. We should be talking about his detention and prosecution. Honestly, Trump should die in the electric chair. But there you go. We don't use it anymore. So I'll take lethal injection, I suppose. But we don't even use that anymore because reasons. So good. He's safe from that if that bothers you. Maybe you're anti-capital punishment. But that's what we should be talking about. Can't arrest, can't indict a former, sitting president. They said, all right, do away with that. Don't indict him. Just surprise arrest him. And then we'll deal with the consequences as they come. I might not stand up under a rule of law, but, maybe he'll fall down the stairs in the jail and, I'm sorry we did it wrong, but he's gone now. And that's really the point of all this. All right. Break coming up, but still have a few minutes to discuss a couple other things. I thought that was an interesting article, worth discussing. And let's see. Where else can we go? This is some more about Flynn. That was of interest. It won't clear up the thing we were talking about yesterday, the very dense law students article about it, but it's probably worth mentioning. We'll see if we get around to it. Let's see. Another good take, I thought, building on what we saw yesterday in the mighty OCD, giving me a brief heart attack here, with a Simpsons clip of Bart Simpson being electrocuted in the electric chair. Bring back the chair, he says, but it's quite a shocking little clip there. But anyway, yesterday's tweet thread about, all right, well, how should we be regarding Trump's lashing out? And, should we really be dismaying over the death of America, or is that a distraction to keep us from doing what we need to be doing? I feel a little bit of that. It was worth noting all that. Today, also in the Washington Post, Michael Gerson writing, Trump's tweets are a strategy of distraction to obscure a policy of abdication. I usually don't have a whole lot of patience for, don't pay attention to his tweets. It's such a distraction. It's distracting you from this, that, or the other thing. And it's difficult to keep track of what different people think you're being distracted from. That's a distraction all by itself. But I thought he made a relatively decent case here in terms of pointing out, you don't lose focus on how badly he's handling the coronavirus pandemic. I don't see how you could, but it's an interesting thought. But this, I think, complements the idea of ineptitude as a shield, the way we were just reading about. In the fourth month of the greatest crisis of his presidency, Trump issued 126 tweets or retweets during a single Sunday. It was also Mother's Day, and that was bad enough. Other than claiming great marks for handling the pandemic and praising Vice President Pence for praising him, there was very little on COVID-19. Mother's Day got 2 mentions. The president attacked Brian Stelter of CNN, NBC's Chuck Todd, ABC's Jimmy Kimmel. He praised the new head of the Chicago Police Union, for whatever reason, and touted the reopening of his Los Angeles golf course. But most of all, Trump extrapolated the framing of Michael Flynn into a deep state plot to destroy his presidency conducted by the FBI, intelligence officials, and President Barack Obama. The president now calls this Obamagate and charges his predecessor with the biggest political crime in American history. Trump made his case in part by retweeting QAnon conspiracy accounts, and he spread the threatening meme, "Hope you had fun investigating me, now it's my turn," in all caps, of course. It is always difficult to determine how much of President Trump's daily communication results from compulsion and how much results from calculation, 0. But it has been Trump's unique genius to turn the appearance of mental breakdown into effective political maneuvering. And we are seeing his approach take shape, a strategy of distraction to obscure a policy of abdication. it is admittedly not easy to distract the attention of the nation from 80,000 COVID-19 deaths, a good portion of which were avoidable. Trump's late and reluctant embrace of sound scientific advice on the pandemic and his early and enthusiastic undermining and abandonment of that advice constitute the worst response to a national crisis since Herbert Hoover. Perhaps the worst response to a national crisis since James Buchanan. The sum of all Trump's picked fights, childish slights, and transgressive tweets is an attempt to divert attention away from a historic fiasco. In pursuit of this goal, being unhinged is a virtue. Irrationality is a rational option. Like a little bit of what we heard in that tweet thread yesterday. All right, our last break coming up, and that means we get a chance finally to talk to Joan at some point coming up after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. All right, well, as much as I'd like to continue with, I think, a nice exposition on how crazy and irrational and inept Trump is, I think you all get the point of this. I just like the turn of phrase at some point about the turning, that somehow Trump's particular genius was turning the appearance of mental breakdown into some sort of giving it some appearance of calculated strategy somehow. But I think you all get the point. But he makes some nice turns of phrase in the balance of the article as well. I did want to mention one other thing that I thought was of some importance. One, I was actually searching for a different post from Hunter that had some other news in it when I happened across this one in his repertoire here. COVID-19 news. U.S. deaths surpass 80,000. Will be past 81,000 by now, of course. But this was news. One of the governors pressuring for early reopening, and I believe it's the governor of Kansas, is now in quarantine. So how do you like that? That's a kind of a new bit. So in addition to Putin's spokesman, we now have Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, who signed on to the Washington Post op-ed by Republican governors touting their pandemic victories, and who visited the White House to push for reopening states despite the pandemic, has now had to place herself in modified quarantine, having been exposed during her White House visit. So I thought that was rather amazing as well. So well worth pointing out. But I was on my way to a different piece that Hunter had written and stopped briefly on another one here, just to note the reality that what's going on here. While Trump has ordered everyone else back to work with no testing regime in place, he and his staff, panicked about getting the coronavirus now, are having themselves tested daily or even multiple times daily. In other words, he knows exactly how to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. He's just not allowing that to happen for any of you. But he's going to have that kind of protection. This was the one I really wanted to note for the record, because this is rather astounding. I had another article on it, but it's always better to have Hunter's turn on these things. Even if we come up with a vaccine, there may not be bottles to put it in. Yeah, that was a really amazing, another great logistics story. He's summarizing this one here. Well, let's just read his summary for just a bit. Anyway, what we're learning from the Trump team's response to the COVID-19 pandemic is that disaster preparation measures are very complicated and involve lots of moving parts. We're learning that a nation's ability to respond to a crisis depends very much on having government infrastructure devoted to predicting where those crises may hit and what small, seemingly innocuous bits are likely to wreck our ability to respond to the whole thing if we don't get them right. This is why, you might say, create a national security team devoted exclusively to preparing responses to newly emerging pandemics, as opposed to having the president's daughter's real estate investor, husband, attempt to work it out on the fly. A national security team devoted exclusively to preparing for pandemics might be able to tell you that even if we were to come up with a vaccine immediately, right now, for the current threat, we could not distribute it because there is a shortage of the sand used to make the glass, used to make the little vials that the vaccine would be put into. It turns out you can't just pour the stuff into mason jars. A Politico story brings us the details on that one. We'll let you get through to it by clicking through it. Another issue pulled from the whistleblower complaint filed by the forced-out government vaccine expert Rick Bright. In addition to a shortage of vaccine vials due to a shortage... here comes Joan. I'll finish up the sentence here. But yes, in addition to the shortage of the vaccine vials, there's also a shortage of medical-grade glass due to a particular kind of river sand being in short supply. There also aren't nearly enough of the little rubber or latex caps that go along with the vials. It will take time to ramp up production, and the Trump administration has seemed especially devoted to rooting out anyone in government who has ever had the audacity to know about such things. And that just gives you a hint at what underlies the rest of that piece. But I had the Politico piece put aside to read you, but nothing could be, there's no better way to convey it to you than to let Hunter do it, quite honestly. Except, perhaps, to ask Joan McCarter to come on and rant about that or other things, whatever may be on your mind. Good morning, Joan. Thanks for coming by.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, and it's great to be able to. So you have a new mic, I bet. Did you get a new one, or you fixed the old one?
No, I just worked out whatever was wrong with the other one.
All right, well, that's even better. How thrifty of you. Did you hit it with a hammer or turn it off and then turn it back on again?
Yes.
Okay.
All of the above.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you made it work. That was, it's not tough to get a new one, but so much better to just fix the old one. Resourceful. People don't do that anymore, you know? Why, back when I was living in the Depression... we saved rubber bands and whatever else. Okay.
I do save plastic bags.
Yeah.
Bag and aluminum foil and yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's better than going out to the store for it now. Or was that something you did before?
Well, I've been trying to reduce plastic in my life.
Okay. That's a good idea.
Including, headphones.
Yeah. Right. So we taped together. Although it used wood and nails to put it back together. No artificial.
Super glue. Duct tape.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad it's working. It does. It sounds fine, so we can hear you. Have you been keeping an eye on? Is the Fauci testimony on your plate today or someone else's?
It's on someone else's. It's on Laura's.
Okay. All right.
Which is. Because I'm still, trying to do the Congress side of things, although he is speaking before Congress,
right.
But you know what I mean.
Yes, so as part of the Fauci and coronavirus beat, it just happens to be they're talking about it in front of Congress today, so it's good classification. Yeah. Well, all right then. There's certainly a lot going on and plenty to keep us busy. What's going on for you these days?
I am just checking in with the House, which I really had a hard time resisting a headline of better late than never on the next coronavirus bill.
Oh.
But better late than never on the next bill.
Okay.
And it really is a good bill.
Oh.
If we can get everything that's in it, if we can just raise holy hell with the Senate and get all of the elements, even if not all of the money for all of the elements, then we're going to be ahead. It's got the things we've been calling for, almost everything except student loan forgiveness, rental and mortgage assistance. One of the things that I have been really railing on that they're at least considering doing is replacing the small business loan program from the last CARES bill that has been so problematic.
Right.
with something that makes just so much more basic sense, providing grants to businesses to cover payroll and benefit expenses.
Okay.
Don't make these companies go deeper into debt. Don't give them all of these complicated rules that they have to follow about what percentage of the loan can go toward payroll versus rent and utilities in order to qualify as a forgivable loan. It's just, there's so much about how the PPP program was set up by Marco Rubio and Susan Collins
Wow, gee.
that just makes it too difficult for many businesses to use, including people. I have a friend who's a jeweler who works alone and can't get these loans. So that makes a lot of sense. They are talking about, and this is big, very big, $2,000 to every American, well, almost every American. I haven't seen the details on who qualifies as almost or
like not
American.
Me. Okay.
But $2,000 for the duration every month.
All right.
Which should have been what we had the first time around.
Yes. And it was proposed. It was out there.
Yep. One of the things that's interesting about going back a little bit to the Paycheck Guarantee Act idea of subsidizing with grants the small businesses is that Josh Hawley from Missouri in the Senate has also supported this idea.
Yeah, that was kind of a big surprise at the time.
The first time around he was saying, give direct cash assistance to everybody.
Yeah.
And now he's saying, just give grants to all of these businesses.
Okay,
Which,
all right. So similar, but he surprises me with that.
Yeah. At the same time, he wants to take the Affordable Care Act and everybody's health insurance away, but,
Right, so meet him halfway. You take him on this deal and then throw him off a bridge.
Yes.
Okay.
What else? Money for the post office, $25 billion for the post office. A lot of money. Numbers fly out of my head as soon as I write them. Much as $4 billion for states to create mail-in balloting systems for November. So a lot of the stuff that we've been railing about did make it into this bill. Expanded broadband. If anything this crisis has shown us is that you really have to have the internet to survive in the 21st century.
Yeah. If we ever go through this again, there's been a huge problem for a lot of people. I know about it just in the context of, reading about it, but schooling. Kids are having a hell of a time, even when they want to try and keep up. And not a lot of kids are really taking it all that seriously. But when they do, you've got a real problem if you can't get a decent signal. Yeah. And there's kids sitting in parking
in a lot
lots.
of rural school districts, I've seen where they put hotspots on school buses in a parking lot, and the parents have to drive their kids to the parking lot in order to pick up the signal so that they can study.
Right. I mean, it's nice that they're able to work it out, but what a disaster, particularly compared to other kids who have the ability to work from the comfort of home as opposed to in a car in a parking lot. I mean, I don't know how you concentrate.
So a lot of really good stuff here.
Yeah, that's good. Will it work? Yes. Can they do it?
Which, they have to come up against Mitch McConnell, who says, in typical Mitch McConnell way, he just doesn't see the urgency of any of this.
Of course not.
I don't think we have yet felt the urgency of acting immediately, Mitch McConnell says.
81,000 later, no urgency. Okay, I mean, I thought maybe, Mitch McConnell is Mitch McConnell, and I thought that perhaps, I don't know what I was thinking. I thought his wife, being in the administration, them being responsible for the whole thing, but then I remembered, they don't take any responsibility for this whole thing, so he's not going to hear anything from her.
No.
Okay.
No. He got the money for bankers through and that was one part of the small business loan program that you can't forget, written by Republicans to help bankers, because it's the bankers who are providing all of these loans.
One group of people with
the
no money.
$500 billion bailout for corporations.
Yes, of
I
course.
mean, McConnell got everything he needed. He fixed it for
That's why he doesn't
everybody
see the urgency.
he wanted to fix it for. So, of course, there's no urgency. It's just people dying,
Yeah.
people without enough food,
Them.
people who can't pay their rent. They don't matter.
No. Well, we don't need those guys. I don't know. You know, he's had a terrible run. The last couple of days have been actually, you know, awful PR-wise for him. But, you know, until he's gone, it doesn't really feel like it means anything that he's. But he's really been stepping in it left and right. I know that his comments that he made yesterday about Obama's comments about how bad things are going. Well, he should have kept his mouth shut, which is a hell of a thing to say about a president, former president or not. And then what did he say? That he lacked? It was classless of him to do this. That was also rather amazing for a guy like McConnell. But
He's letting his
life.
Kentucky show there.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah. All right.
He also, just as an aside, is back to his usual with the Patriot Act. He really is scary when it comes to this kind of thing. His Patriot Act stuff, particularly, he wants the FBI to be able to, without a warrant, get everybody's internet search history. This is the amendment he's going to propose to the reauthorization of FISA.
Okay. Yeah, it was being weirdly portrayed.
I don't think it can pass. I don't think that you've got at least 3 Republicans. You've got Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and probably Steve Daines from Montana who are going to say no to that. I don't know how many others. It certainly can't get through the House.
Yeah, okay.
But he's going to do his thing. We've seen him do this before, and it's really irrational. On the Patriot Act specifically and on FISA, go to bat for things that do not even have Republican support and try to hold the entire Senate hostage by not letting it move forward until he gets his way, and then not getting his way and having to cave. It's really an interesting thing that McConnell, a quirk of McConnell, who usually has votes counted and who usually won't move forward without something he knows he can make happen. On this one, he just tries to hammer it through.
I mean, I guess he figures there's nothing else going on. Might as well. But it is odd and should ordinarily be considered out of character for somebody who's considered a real operator.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
So we'll see what happens on this one. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. We'll see.
Yeah, I guess you could say maybe the one bright spot for him PR-wise in the last day or two was the way this was characterized in the initial news reports. This provision that he wants to add as an amendment that just might not fly at all was sort of presented on the news that I saw on flying by on Twitter that there was a fait accompli that McConnell was like ordering this but it's not up to what kind of a headline is this? This is a very
everything
strange...
always reports that way.
Yeah, I guess, but I don't know. I never really felt like it was.
McConnell's always reported on that way.
Huh.
As
maybe I need to fix my glasses. Usually I just see right through it all the time, but yesterday this one really struck me as people were complaining. But hey, he doesn't get to do that, right? Well, no, of course not. Why is this the headline?
Right. Why is it a fait accompli? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess I haven't noticed it enough in the past, but yeah, that was very odd. And I thought, why would they approve of this? And why does everybody think that it would get through the House? But a better point you make, why does anybody think it would get through the Senate or even the Republican conference for that matter? Okay.
I know that we're going to see some Republican senators raising hell about it. And I don't, if you've got Mike Lee.
Yeah, sure.
And Rand Paul, what about Ted Cruz? It just.
What that guy's
it was an interesting wrinkle.
All right.
And of course, nothing to do with coronavirus, which really should be the thing that Mitch McConnell's focusing on, except 80,000 people dead really isn't urgent to him.
Yeah, I guess not. And there would be such a great. I think there's a great mechanism using coronavirus to do that. I have lots of concerns about the privacy issues involved in this, but I've seen more and more that they're able to, like, for instance, track the cell phone pinging of people who show up at protests, and then where do they go back to afterwards? You know, and I guess to worry about are there any outbreaks where people who show up at the anti-stay-at-home protests go. It's fascinating to be able to see that, but of course worrying, I don't think I like the idea that, private companies can just, or anybody can just trace your movements like that, even though they say they anonymize it. But that would have been, I think, a great backdoor for expanded surveillance powers. Well, we're just trying to track people. Hey, you wanted testing and tracking, didn't you? And then people would stammer and maybe even accept it. But to just say, you know what? I think we should be able to just seize your internet browsing history. That doesn't help anybody with anything.
No, it doesn't help anybody with anything. And what you need really is to invest in the old-fashioned way of contact tracing with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of people who need jobs. Hire them to do contact tracing.
Yes, that is true.
Find this. Of course, you have to have testing in order for contact tracing to really work. You got to find out who's got it and to find out who they've been in contact with. But
right, you can't just walk around and ask everybody, who do you know? At random.
Well, you could try.
That's true. It wouldn't be worth very much, but if we're just paying you for the hell of it, then go ahead. But I did.
Oh, and by the way, there's a lot more money for testing in the House bill, as well as state and local and county support. States, counties, cities, towns. They're putting the money in to support them, ignoring Mitch McConnell and his blue state bailout rhetoric.
Okay, well that's wise. We'll see whether they.
It is wise because it's all of the states that are suffering, all of the municipalities. It's people being laid off from their city and state jobs in Kentucky too. Yeah,
he'll eventually hear about that. And speaking as we were about the number of cases per million in population and I guess the per capita rates of cases and deaths, I did see reported briefly that now every state in the country per capita has more cases per capita than South Korea ever had. So times 50, really.
We're number one.
Yes.
Times 50.
I know, we're getting there. I did see something. I'll have to dig this one up. I saw a very concerning thing about contact tracing and about the idea of hiring all these people. Apparently the right-wing lunatics that ruin everything, the reason why we can't have nice things, I guess they've decided that there will be no contact tracing in this country if they can help it. If a contact tracer shows up at their door, they now say they're going to shoot him. They're going to find out who are the people who are tracking Americans and mark them for death. So that's a good sign for getting out from underneath this thing too. I mean, it's thankfully still only 16 people, but 16 people with 350 guns.
Right.
Who are doing this.
The death cult is just...
They love it. Yeah. They're going to kill the people who are going to stop people from dying. I guess.
The unformed human, the zygote.
Yeah.
That we have to protect to the death.
Right. And
everybody else,
Guess not. Yeah, J.J. McNabb, who monitors the militia types, says that's all the rage now. But then again, they used to say, more mainstream people. Eric Erickson used to say he was going to shoot census takers. So
right.
I guess there's nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new under the sun. There's just a louder bullhorn for them and more guns that they stockpiled in the last decade.
Hooray! All right. Well, on the better news, I liked your news better. I shouldn't have said it. All the stuff about what Congress is working on. That's a good thing. How do they move on it? When are they coming back? What's happening? Are they back now and I didn't notice?
They promised they would give everybody 72 hours to figure out how to get back to D.C.
Yeah.
So Friday is going to be the earliest.
Okay.
That's frustrating. I mean, this really is better late than never, but very late.
Yes. Almost not
Had
better.
they seized on the momentum that they had after passing CARES, particularly the momentum created when we found out what a disaster the loan program was going to be. The rollout was bad. The Shake Shack getting the money, Chris Steakhouse getting the money,
Yeah.
Ritz-Carlton getting the money.
Wow.
Had they had the ability
private
to
schools.
seize on it right then,
Yeah. That would have been better.
it would have been a lot better. But
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope that they can do this. And I mean, I thought for a long time we were going to see, and I think it was the Republican intention to say, all right, well, we got what we wanted. And then, gee whiz, now it's go, how are we going to pay for it now?
oh yes, we have the how are we going to pay for it now? And probably my favorite bonker story of the week so far is the State Department guy that's buddies with Jared that came up with the Social Security plan. Did you see this one?
I've seen the plan. I didn't realize it was a Jared buddy.
It's a Jared buddy from the State Department, which of course has a lot of influence in domestic policy.
Sure, why not? That's
Where
interesting.
you take $10,000 now from Social Security and you work until you die because you can't get it on the other end.
Right, but then you might die now, so I guess it's supposedly okay for him.
Bonkers.
So, that's I didn't realize where it came from. Although I did recognize it as Ivanka's family leave plan.
Yes.
But repurposed, and so I wonder whether she
it's
loaned
called,
it to
I
him.
love the name, the Eagle Plan.
The Eagle plan, the Eagle Patriot
Eagle
America plan. That is amazing. That sounds like a joke. Do they try to make a acronym for it, or is it just? I mean, eagles are awesome.
Not as far as I am aware. I think they just think if you put an eagle on it, people will love it.
You know what? I do. They're right. They win.
Well, yeah, you gotta love it just because.
Right. And it's aimed at destroying the retirement of people who have eagles in their avatars. So
there you go.
That's why they like it. That is very interesting. I didn't realize that. I wonder whether well, I guess no one really believes Ivanka thought of that the first time. I was going to say, oh, is she mad that she's not getting credit for it? But maybe, even though she didn't come up with it the first time. Okay, but the State Department, hard at work, I guess, because no one will talk to our diplomats.
Right.
He's got time on his hands. How strange. All right. So anyway, so that was out there. I guess that is anybody going to try and bring that up or shoehorn that into, say, the Senate version of this bill, or is that a separate standalone
I really
thing?
don't think so. I think the political arm of the White House, as expressed by his press spokesperson, Hogan Gidley, is that his name?
It is. I mean, he says it is.
He called it ludicrous. So we'll see.
All right.
At the same time, what Trump is still hung up on is even more ludicrous, and that's the payroll tax cut.
Oh, yeah.
Which
But
there aren't people on payroll.
yeah.
One, there's no stimulus there because there's no payroll to not be taxed. And it's such a stupid idea. Even Senate Republicans who love their tax cuts are saying, no.
Good.
No.
All right. That might be too much to hope for, but I'm
But
glad
that
you
also
see it.
hurts Social Security. You know.
Yes, right, true. Good point.
Keep in mind.
So I guess just anything that they can think of to hurt Social Security is that's where they start from. I need a Republican solution to this thing. Let's start from hurting Social Security and then see if I can find a different way to do it.
Pretty much.
All right.
Pretty much.
Seems to be what's going on. News flash that happens across my desk here. Frank Pallone announcing that with Diana DeGetti going to be opening a congressional investigation, if there are such things after the Supreme Court today, of Blue Flame Medical LLC, the original Project Airbridge pirate firm, the first one out of the gate to be reported as selling stuff they don't know how to get. So that's good news. Good. Glad to hear that. And
it's to get.
Yeah. Oh, is it? All right. To get. Yeah. All right. Screwed that one up.
Like me and Lepage.
Okay.
I just want to make him French.
It's so much easier. It's much easier if you think it rhymes with spaghetti. It's easy to remember. But okay, to get. I'm sorry. You should investigate why I can't get that right. And I'll testify. You won't even need the Supreme Court to order me to do so. So, we've got a lot to keep an eye on today. Thank you for coming in. Busy day.
Busy day, and don't expect election returns in California tonight because it's a mail-in.
Yeah, right. Well, that's true. So it'll take a little while and a bit of a nail biter, but yeah.
And next week I want to talk about how elections have to change. And our
Okay.
expectations.
We'll do that, and I'll give you all the time you want for it. You just have to
All right.
tell me when. How about that? Okay.
Oh, sounds like a plan.
Yes, it's a good one, too. Thanks very much for
Thanks,
coming by.
Kagro. Talk to you
Take
next
care.
week.
All right. Stay healthy till then. We'll talk to you then. And we'll have a lot to reflect on between now and then. And I crammed an awful lot into this one. There's still a million things that we didn't get to. Luckily for you, there's another program following us right here on Netroots Radio. It's Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we got a little bit of time to read through what he's got. Let's see. Definitely going to be talking about the Supreme Court and Deutsche Bank and the subpoenas. That's on his menu. Also, Alabama Republicans want to use federal virus aid to build a new state house because that'll cure a lot of people, you see. Or maybe they were protesters outside of the old one and they got infected. A Republican congresswoman says federal virus aid that might help the post office is, of course, a recipe for disaster. And what else are they doing? Jerky Republicans complaining about discrimination against oil companies amid the pandemic. Sure.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Apparently they're angry that UV light from the sun is somehow making that worse. I'd love to find out how that got to be on the bad list. And now, a red notice from Interpol for the wife of the U.S. diplomat who was sought in the UK over her fatal car crash that killed a British teen, and she fled the country. An update on that and much more.